The Detroit Lions' kryptonite over the last 2 decades has been the Baltimore Ravens. It doesn't matter how good the Detroit Lions are, what situation they find themselves at the end of the game, Baltimore always seems to come out on top. And that's just not me being negative. That is factually true. Over the last 2 decades, and even for an all-time standing, the Detroit Lions have only ever beaten the Baltimore Ravens a single time in franchise history. That was in 2005. So it has been 2 decades since the Detroit Lions have beaten the Baltimore Ravens, and they've certainly had their opportunities. In 2023, the Detroit Lions were an NFC contender, going all the way to the NFC Championship game, but in that season, they lost to Baltimore 38-6. A few years prior, the Detroit Lions played a good game. They were winning and leading as time was set to expire, but they forced a 66-yard field goal, a record-setting field goal distance to ice the game for Baltimore. And of course, Justin Tucker would make that kick and still hold the record to this very day. It has not been good for the Detroit Lions versus the Baltimore Ravens. Again, it just doesn't seem to matter what they do. Baltimore always seems to come out on top. And tonight, they have another opportunity to add to that chapter of defeat. The Detroit Lions take on the Baltimore Ravens on Monday Night Football, the first primetime matchup for the Detroit Lions on their young season as they look to make a statement. They lost in week 1 to a Super Bowl contender. They beat up week 2 against a division rival that was not as talented as they were. Week 3 is the opportunity to make that statement. Week 3 is the opportunity to claim that the Detroit Lions are not only back, not only as good as years prior, but they can finally beat AFC contenders. They can compete with Baltimore, that they can compete with anybody across the league. And tonight, they're going to have the opportunity to shift that narrative from, oh, coordinators left, regression season, to, okay, contenders are still here, and the Detroit Lions are an elite football team. Now, the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens find themselves in very similar situations this year. The Detroit Lions are 1-1 on the year. After a disappointing loss in week 1 to a Super Bowl contender, they had a huge bounce back week in week 2 against a bottom dweller in their division. Baltimore in a very similar situation. After choking away a 14-point lead in the fourth quarter of week 1 against the Buffalo Bills, a true Super Bowl contender, they beat up on the lower end of their division. They beat up on the Cleveland Browns, put up 40 points, and got a pretty easy victory walking out of week 2. The similarities continue as both the Chicago Bears and the Cleveland Browns bounce back this week. Of course, the Cleveland Browns beating the Green Bay Packers, and the Chicago Bears putting up big points and getting a huge victory over the Dallas Cowboys. Both the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens are looking to get above 500 for the first time on the season, and really, I think are both making a claim for that contender status. Both teams are kind of looked at right now as good, even great teams, but not necessarily Super Bowl contenders, not necessarily 2 to 3 teams in football. But with a win here tonight, and specifically a dominant win tonight for either side, I think that narrative will begin to shift towards contender. Now, as I mentioned, the Detroit Lions have not fared well in Baltimore in their history. As an all-time record, both home and away, the Baltimore Ravens are 6-1 against the Detroit Lions. They've outscored the Detroit Lions on an all-time scoreboard of 203-107. Their last meeting in 2023, as I mentioned, a 32-point loss in Baltimore, despite the Detroit Lions having a very talented roster and a very good season. And before that was the record-setting field goal set by Justin Tucker in 2021. It doesn't matter for the Detroit Lions how good their season is going, how good they are, or even how good of a situation they find themselves in. Baltimore always seems to find a way. Now, the Detroit Lions go into this game with pretty good numbers offensively. They rank 6th in offensive yardage, 6th in passing yardage, 16th in rushing yardage, and 3rd overall as a scoring offense across the NFL. That is, of course, largely boosted by the 52-point burger that they dropped on Chicago a week ago, but ranking 3rd in the NFL in points is still ranking 3rd in the NFL in points despite how few weeks have been played, and the offense really has been good. They've been efficient. They've been able to drive up and down the field in both games. The difference, of course, being the red zone and the scoring efficiency in week 2 as opposed to week 1. Baltimore's offense is not nearly as productive throughout the early stages of their drives, but they have been able to put points on the board more than any other team in football. They rank 13th in total yardage, 24th in passing yardage, 5th in rushing yardage, but 21st, the very best and highest scoring team in football, averaging over 40 points per game through the first 2 weeks. They put up 40 points against the Bills, they put up 41 points against Cleveland, and they are the highest scoring team at this point in NFL history through the first 2 weeks of the NFL year. Now, going up against them will be Detroit's defense, who actually statistically have ranked pretty well over the first couple of weeks. They rank 9th overall in yardage for the NFL. They rank 11th against the pass, 15th against the run, but of course they do rank 27th in scoring defense. They give up 27 points to the Green Bay Packers and 21 points to the Chicago Bears. Neither of those games defensively were incredible or big failures for the Detroit Lions defense. I thought that they both had really good moments. I thought especially against the Bears in the second half, they looked quite good actually. And against the Packers in the second half, they looked quite good, but they do need to get off to a hotter start. They can't allow opening drive touchdowns every single week. They need to find a way to get off the field more often, but they do seem to settle into games quite nicely. As I mentioned, second half of the Chicago Bears game, they gave up 1 touchdown after the game was essentially out of reach for Chicago. And even going against a Green Bay Packers offense that was pretty good, they only allowed points in the second half after the offense failed on a 4th down conversion that led to a touchdown. And of course, a big punt return because the offense punted from their own 5-yard line that set Green Bay up in field goal range. Their defense in the second half has been phenomenal for the Detroit Lions, and hopefully with the way that the Baltimore Ravens tend to finish their football games, they can do some similar things in week 3. Baltimore's defense is just as bad and just as poor as the Detroit Lions defense. Yardage-wise, they rank 3rd to last in the NFL. They rank as the 2nd to worst passing defense. They rank 17th in rushing defense and 26th overall in scoring defense. Now, obviously, that number is inflated or deflated depending on how you look at it because of the 40 points that were dropped on them against the Buffalo Bills, but it is still concerning. They aren't picking up a lot of yardage. They aren't running the ball particularly effective. They aren't, stopping the run or stopping the pass particularly well. They aren't doing anything very well on defense for the Baltimore Ravens, and that is not typical. The Baltimore Ravens are typically one of the superstars as a pass rusher. They may not have the biggest names every year, but they always seem to be one of the best cohesive units across the league, and they have superstars. They have Kyle Hamilton. They have Roquan Smith. They have some really, really good players on that defensive side of the ball, but for one reason or another, it just doesn't seem to be coming together for them this season like it has in previous years. So what are the keys to victory? What did the Detroit Lions have to do to escape Baltimore with a victory, to make a statement in week 3 and truly cement themselves yet again as Super Bowl contenders in the NFC? Well, I think there's a few things that they need to do to win this game. The first thing, they need to sustain long drives. The longer they can keep Lamar Jackson, the longer they can keep Derrick Henry off the field, the better it will be for the Detroit Lions. Their defense over the last few years has really been susceptible to scrambling quarterbacks. They have not been able to stop Lamar Jackson when they've played him. They have not been able to stop Kyler Murray when they've played him. Even lesser scramblers, guys like Caleb Williams, who you don't think about as much, Patrick Mahomes, quarterbacks that can certainly do it, but aren't really known for scrambling. Even Jordan Love, as an example, have had great rushing days against the Detroit Lions. Baker Mayfield had a great rushing day last year against Detroit. They just don't seem to stop the quarterback scramble very well, and Lamar Jackson does that very well. If they can keep Lamar Jackson off the field as often as possible, they are going to have a better chance to win this game. Scoring touchdowns. That one may seem very obvious, but just like the Green Bay Packers game, just like that week 1 contest, they need to put points on the board. It's not enough to sustain long drives. It's not enough to have 8, 9, 10 minutes drives that end in field goals. You need touchdowns. What worked last week was putting the football in the end zone, being efficient in the red zone, taking some shots down the field, and they're going to have hopefully opportunities to do that. The Baltimore pass rush hasn't been super good this year. Their defense, as I said, ranks 30th against the pass. The Lions should have opportunities, at least statistically, to take some shots down the field and put up numbers through the air, but they have to score touchdowns. It's not enough to get to the red zone. It has to be in the end zone. And of course, as I mentioned, containing Lamar Jackson should be priority number 1. Lamar Jackson is talented enough to beat you with his arm. Absolutely. He is an MVP candidate, a two-time MVP in the NFL. He is one of the best players the Lions will face all season, but he is most dangerous when he is extending plays. He's most dangerous on the ground with his feet, being an elusive runner. And if the Lions can contain Lamar Jackson, force him to play from within the pocket, yep, they're going to give up big plays. Yes, they're going to give up big passes. Yes, Lamar Jackson is going to make a few highlight plays, but if they can contain the run, make it one-dimensional, I think that they will be off to a good start and in a good place defensively every time that they take the field. For Baltimore, they just need to win the interior. They need to beat Christian Mahogany. They need to beat Tate Ratledge, and they need to beat Graham Glasgow. It's going to be tough with their starting defensive tackle not playing in this game, but they need to do it. And they need to get the quarterback run moving early. Lamar Jackson has to scramble in this game. They are going to have to move Lamar Jackson around, put him in situations to pick up yardage with his feet. And if they can do those two things, just those two things like the Green Bay Packers did, the Baltimore Ravens are going to walk out of this game with a victory. On the day, I think the Baltimore Ravens are not as good as they have been in years past. I think if you were to go position by position, player by player, statistic by statistic, I think the Detroit Lions are actually a better football team than the Baltimore Ravens. But with that being said, the Ravens play a style of football that counters the Detroit Lions quite well. They have a quarterback that runs. They have a tough run game. They have a strong defense typically. And those are teams that are more physical than the Detroit Lions, teams that take it to them in a way that very few can. Baltimore is one of those teams, just like Green Bay, who can very easily be more physical than Detroit, can run the ball like Detroit, can take the identity that the Detroit Lions have and they want to have and kind of shove it back in their face. Not many teams can do it. Green Bay can do it. Baltimore can do it. Kansas City can do it in years past, but the Rams can do it. Very few teams can do it the way that Baltimore does, and that is why the Lions struggle. So if I had to guess, I think the Detroit Lions fall to 1-2 this season. And not necessarily because they're a bad football team. I just think the matchup isn't great for them. I don't think the outcome is great for the Detroit Lions. And overall, I do think the Lions will put up a good fight. I don't think it'll be nearly as bad or as nearly as dramatic or heavily outscored as the 2023 game. But if I had to guess, going into week 3, I think the Detroit Lions should be the underdogs in this game, and they have the opportunity to bounce back. They play Cleveland, they play Cincinnati, they play some really less quality teams over the next couple of weeks to get above 500, but to start 1-2 is tough for your NFL season. To play the Packers and the Ravens in the first 3 weeks is a tough time for the Detroit Lions, but we'll see what happens. If the Lions win tonight, they make a statement. They announce to the NFL that they are back. I can't wait to see it happen. So with that being said, let me know down in the comments below your opinions on the Detroit Lions versus Baltimore Ravens game. Do you expect a victory? Do you expect a loss? What are your expectations for players and statistics in that game? I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions!